But what is the Fed, right? What does it actually do? Who created the Federal Reserve and why? And more importantly, how did a privately owned bank with shareholders gain control of our country's banking and monetary system in the first place? The decisions that this powerful private bank makes impacts you, your family, and everyone you've ever known. So during this exclusive training, you're going to become one of the informed few that understands how this country's banking and monetary system works as we literally pull back the curtain on the Federal Reserve. So you may be thinking, Mike, why is this so important? Some people think the Federal Reserve banks are United States government institutions. They are private credit monopolies which prey upon the people of the United States for the benefit of themselves and their foreign customers. That's why this is so important. So let's quickly dive into the history of central banking so you can understand this concept of what is a central bank. And this concept goes all the way back to the 1600s. And after 50 years of war, financially exhausted, the English government needed loans to fund their political activities. And it was Scottish banker William Paterson who came up with this idea, quote, "The bank hath benefit of interest on all monies which it creates out of nothing." So this idea that a private central bank that could create currency out of nothing and charge interest for it was deemed the solution for the English government. And from there, William Paterson made a deal with the English government. And from there, he was able to create a loan. And from that loan, he was also able to get those special powers to be able to create and print the currency of the nation. And from there, the Bank of England was established. And again, this is way back in 1694. So the Bank of England was the world's first central bank. And through this privately owned bank, William Paterson was able to issue and loan money it creates from thin air to the English government with interest. And it has been doing so ever since. So what is a central bank? A central bank is a private entity that manages a government's money supply and can lend money it creates from thin air to the government at interest. Okay, and that interest point, that is the key to this whole equation, because it's because of this interest charge that everybody else in the world has to pay interest. You see, central banking is more influential than laws, politicians, or even government.
That's true.
But yet it's not the focus of the general public. So here in the United States, our central bank is called the Federal Reserve. So how was it created? And who actually created the Federal Reserve?
And before we get into that, so I'm attorney Michael Ehline, and although I was streaming on Twitter, I didn't have YouTube set up right. So I just started streaming my YouTube video. So let me just give you the recap. So I am a lawyer licensed in California and Texas. I'm also an inactive U.S. Marine. I'm a military historian, and I know a lot about natural law and the original intent of our founding fathers, which never was to have a centralized currency system. It was supposed to be a gold and silver backed currency system, which we don't have. There was never supposed to be an income tax because that violates your Fourth Amendment rights. The government has no business knowing how much you earn. And so this was an abomination created at Jackal Island by bankers. And many of those banking companies and cartels are based out of Israel today. And the real reason, in my earnest opinion, for the attack against Iran is because the United States is engaged in what's called a proxy war against the BRICS nations. BRICS is a currency that China, Iran, and Russia primarily are responsible for creating a currency system that's based upon something of intrinsic value rather than the promise of our shady United States government politicians, which is what our Federal Reserve note is based on. And because of that, our CIA and the Mossad and Israel do not want our currency system replaced. And in my humble opinion, the real reason for this war against Iran is based upon our currency system. The United States government and its proxies, or many people say is Israel's proxies in the United States, and the Federal Reserve, the privately run and owned banker-controlled Federal Reserve banking system, cartel, does not want a BRICS currency. And that is the real reason for these attacks. I went a little bit earlier and did a show with you about the Iranian rules that say it's okay to lie to people that are your enemy, even your friends. I talked about I think it's called the Taroff system, as well as the Taqiyya, which is the Islamic system that allows you to lie to people who aren't the same religion as you. And I believe that the 3 sites that we hit, that the IAEA was monitoring, were straw man complexes. Maybe one of them was housing nuclear material. 2 days prior to our attack, big trucks pulled up and probably drove away with all that, with whatever nuclear material was in there, and probably took it away to the real location where the nuclear bombs are stored in Iran. And so now we're going to have no choice but to put boots on the ground. A lot of my old units from the Marine Corps have been activated, as far as I know. And it's highly probable that this probably kicked off World War III. We know now that the Strait of Hormuz is going to be cut off, which is going to spike oil prices. And bankers are really going to get rich here. And we know that the politicians and wealthy people already have underground bunkers to withstand tactical nukes. We know that Sleepy Joe opened our southern border, making it possible for thousands upon thousands of sleeper cells, Iranian terrorists, and Islamic terrorists to flood across our border, along with at least 50,000 Chinese national military-age males that we know of. These are all BRICS nations who are dedicated to the destruction of the United States economic system. So the first video that I'm showing you is a reaction video that I'm doing on the creation of our Federal Reserve Bank and how it was hoisted upon us and how it's slowly destroyed the United States middle class. And so right now, let's get back into it so you can learn and go with me and ask questions. Anybody who throws me a super chat or something like that, I'll make sure to answer your questions first. Please buy memberships. Make sure to like and subscribe, and make sure to save always for later viewing. That really helps me a lot with the algorithm. Hopefully you'll like the show today. I'm going to have to bone out of here around 12 o'clock, so I've only got about an hour and 15 minutes to share in earnest with you a lot of these reaction videos. So I'm going to try to get through this as quickly as I can. And I appreciate you joining me these last couple of days and for doing that all-nighter with me last night. That was kind of you guys. Obviously, I don't look too good. I just got back from the gym, did not have time to switch out into a shirt and tie. But this is a really big deal for me because I want you guys to be prepared for what's coming next. Here we go.
Reserve private bank here in the United States. So here in the United States, our central bank is called the Federal Reserve.
Hey,
so
Cops.
how was it created?
Hey, guys.
And who actually created the Federal Reserve private bank here in the United States? Well, for that, you're going to have to fast forward to the year 1910. And after 2 failed attempts, another group of bankers, wanted to establish a private central bank in the United States. Meet Senator Nelson Aldrich, a politician and businessman that most people today have never heard of Senator Aldrich. However, what he helped orchestrate in the closing years of his life still affects most of the world to this day. And what he did would actually have our country's founding fathers spinning in their graves. You see, what Senator Aldrich did is he arranged a secret meeting, with these 6 individuals, Paul Warburg, Frank Vanderlip, Benjamin Strong, Henry Davidson, Charles Norton, and Abe Andrews. And just understand that these 6 individuals represented, 25% of the world's wealth at the time. So that's how powerful these bankers and these individual men were and the people that they were representing. What they did is they boarded...
By the way, Warburg, one of the most evil Baal and Moloch worshippers on the planet. Let's keep going.
A private train car in total secrecy. And where were they headed? Jackal Island, Georgia, to this resort here that was frequented by JP Morgan and other billionaires. And over the next 9 days, the Federal Reserve was created. Frank Vanderlip, one of the individuals at this meeting, once said in one of his later memoirs, "I was as secretive indeed, as furtive, as any conspirator. Discover we knew simply must not happen, or else all of our time and effort would be wasted.
100%.
If it were to be exposed that our particular group had got together and written a banking bill, that bill would have no chance whatever of passage by Congress." You see, this thing was pitched to stabilize the economy and free the people from the grip of Wall Street and the big banks.
Yeah, right.
But the unfortunate thing here is that the people they were promising to stop were the ones writing the bill. And if this bill was to pass, it would give this group, okay, what was later referred to as the Jackal Island group, it would give this group of powerful men the power to print currency from nothing and lend it to the government at interest. So you might be asking, why was all of this done in secret? You see, why didn't they meet, somewhere like Washington, D.C. versus Jekyll Island, Georgia? You see, back in the day, back in the early 1900s, most people knew what a central bank was. And back in the day, people did not want a central bank. You see, back then, everybody knew that everywhere there had been a central bank, there would be wealth inequality. There would be wild booms and busts in the economy. And after each and every bust, okay, the rich would somehow magically get richer and richer, but yet the poor will become poorer and poorer. Thomas Jefferson once said, "The end of democracy and the defeat of the American Revolution will occur when government falls into the hands of lending institutions and moneyed incorporations." Originally named the Aldrich Bill, everybody knew who Senator Aldrich was and that he had worked with the banks and had many, many ties to the banking industry at that time. So as the Aldrich Bill, it didn't go through. The bill was later renamed the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. They had a couple of millionaires, put it before Congress. See, but the
Yeah,
Jekyll
sure
Island
does,
group still
100%.
had to gain public support for this. So what they did is, and this is truly a classic misinformation campaign, is that these bankers went out there and spoke against the bill that they actually created. These guys were in the newspaper saying that the Federal Reserve Act is going to destroy the banks and big business. And so they went out there and spoke out against their own bill that they created at Jekyll Island. To the common individual on the street hearing this, most people thought, well, if the bankers don't like it, then it must be good. And
Big war,
so
yeah.
unwittingly, people ended up supporting this Trojan horse, the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. And as well, they had to get it through Congress. So they put some false safeguards in there that they later removed once the bill was passed. But really just a misinformation campaign was really all it took, and a double head fake on the Congress. That's all it took. And on December 23rd, 1913, President Woodrow Wilson signed the Federal Reserve Act
Traitor.
into law. And just like that, folks, the
Traitor.
Federal Reserve
Woodrow Wilson,
was
traitor.
created. And this small
Woodrow Wilson was a traitor to this country by allowing these bankers to gain control over our currency system. And by the way, guys, have you ever noticed how Trump is not able to fire the head of the Federal Reserve? Why do you think that is? Because it's not a government corporation. By the way, remember when Trump issued an executive order to get rid of diversity, equity, and inclusion? In other words, hiring people not based on merit, but hiring them based upon skin color or the fact that it's a dude that likes to ball another dude, for example. That was the hiring thing that they wanted to use. Guess what? It's still in place at the Federal Reserve. Why do you think that is? Why didn't President Trump's executive order hold any sway with the Federal Reserve banking system? I wonder. Maybe it's because they're not subject to executive control or executive oversight. Maybe that's why. What do you guys think?
group of very powerful bankers and very powerful men just acquired complete monopoly over the issuing and creation of American currency, and now have the
Amen,
ability
Ronnie.
to lend that currency that it creates from nothing to our own government at interest. Now, in addition to this, Senator Aldrich also led the conception of the 16th Amendment to our Constitution. Well, this amendment authorized the imposition of federal income taxes on American citizens. You see, before the Federal Reserve was
Which, in my opinion, as a lawyer, violates the Fourth Amendment. It violates your right of privacy. The government has no right to know how much you earn. It's your money. You earned it. But now that it became fiat currency, it's no longer money. It's fiat currency. It's not yours anymore. It belongs to who? The Federal Reserve Bank. It's a note. It's a note of debt. It has no intrinsic value whatsoever. Let's keep going.
was created, there was no need for an income tax. Income taxes only exist so that the government has the ability to pay the interest on currency it has been obligated to borrow from the Federal Reserve since 1913.
Hey, Jody.
So income taxes only exist so we can pay interest to the Federal Reserve. So we got to give a big thank you to Senator Aldrich here. In the final years of
Traitor.
Woodrow Wilson's presidency, he once said, "I am a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country. A great industrial nation is now controlled by its system of credit. We are no longer a government of free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and the vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men." So how powerful is the Federal Reserve? Okay, what kind of controls over our economy do they have? Permit me to issue and control the money of a nation, and I care not who makes its laws. Mayer Amschel Rothschild, founder of the Rothschild International Banking Dynasty. So how powerful is the Federal Reserve? The Federal Reserve is the most powerful entity in the country, and they're not ashamed to admit it either. Hear it from Alan Greenspan, former chairman of the Federal Reserve.
What is the proper relationship? What should be the proper relationship between a chairman of the Fed and a president of the United States?
Well, first of all, the Federal Reserve is an independent agency, and that means basically that there is no other agency of government which can overrule actions that we take.
Did you hear that?
What the relationships are don't frankly matter.
You see, in addition to this, the feds can't even be touched by investigating parties. Hear from former Inspector General Elizabeth Coleman.
Inspector Coleman, you're the Inspector General for the Federal Reserve, right? Okay.
That's correct.
Have you done any investigations concerning the Federal Reserve's role in deciding not to save Lehman Brothers, which led to shockwaves that went through the entire financial system?
We do not currently have an investigation in that particular area.
All right, what about the $1 trillion plus in expansion of the Federal Reserve's balance sheet since last September? Have you conducted any investigations regarding that?
We call it a review, and so if you could determine investigation, they have different connotations.
Right, but you're the Inspector General. My question to you specifically is, do you know who received that $1 trillion plus that the Fed extended and put on its balance sheet since last September? Do you know the identity of the recipients?
I do not know. We have not looked at that specific area. You know, I think it may be important at this point too, just to bring up a certain aspect related to our jurisdiction. We do not have jurisdiction to directly go out and audit Reserve Bank activities specifically.
Hear that?
You see, the rules of the Fed are quite clear. Number one, the Federal Reserve shall have the monopoly on creating money in the United States. Number two, the Reserve Bank shall be a private corporation. Number three, the shareholders, the articles of incorporation, and the management of the Fed shall never be open to public scrutiny. And number four, the Federal Reserve can print as much money as Congress requests and charge interest.
Now, I just want to share something with you. I really like this video, but there are some issues where the narrator is wrong. What the Federal Reserve Bank prints is not money. It is called fiat currency. It is worthless paper backed by the promise of the United States government to back it up. It has absolutely zero intrinsic value. It's backed by nothing but a promise of our government, a bunch of corrupt politicians. That's it, guys. That is all it is. So when he says money, that is incorrect. But I do like the video so far. I really like the history. I think it makes a lot of sense. By the way, how you doing, Ozzy? How you doing, Mr. Osgood? Greg B, thanks for showing up. Gloria, thanks for always supporting my channel. I love having my moderators here. I appreciate you guys hooking me up with a couple super chats and buying some memberships last night. To me, getting the subscriptions are more important than super chats. Buy as many subscriptions as you can so other people who are like-minded, who want to create parallel systems and return us back to a currency system based on something of intrinsic value, whether it's gold, silver, or some kind of digital asset backed by something of intrinsic value, please, please, please subscribe to my channel so we can have our private meetings that are not public, where we can really talk about the nitty-gritty of what's going on. I've got over 20 years in practice as an attorney. Although I make my money, my Federal Reserve notes from doing catastrophic injury cases, my background is as a Marine, is as a military historian, and a patriot who loves my country over everything there could possibly be. And I consider everyone on my channel to be part of the extended Team MPE family. All right, let's get back into the video. Learn a little bit about why we're going to war with the BRICS countries. And the way you have to know first is to know the history of our private Federal Reserve Bank monopoly over the creation of our currency that was hoisted upon us by the abomination of Jackal Island and a bunch of very wealthy bankers. Here we go.
To the US taxpayer. Again, this is money they can print from nothing. So why is this
Not
so
money.
important? You see, the Bank of England and the Federal Reserve are now the model for all other central banks.
That's right.
There is a central bank, just like the Federal Reserve, in every country in the world.
Orange County,
except North
California,
Korea,
Ozzy.
Iran, and
Newport
Cuba.
Beach.
Those are the only 3 countries that don't have a central bank. And in the year 2000, okay, so not too long ago, that list actually included 3 other countries: Libya, Afghanistan, and Iraq. Also, since World War II, the US dollar has been the world's reserve currency. And that means
SWE,
that
good seeing you, man.
every other currency is backed by the US dollar. And the US dollar was also backed by gold. And you can see this. If you look at the old school $20 bill, you can see right here where it says that it's redeemable in gold on demand. You see, back in the day, every piece of currency used to be backed by gold, even this old school $100 bill from 1928, redeemable in gold on demand. And because of the fact that the US dollar was backed by gold, exchange rates were stable and easier to predict. But then in 1971, due to a falling US dollar and the Vietnam War, President Richard Nixon took the country off the gold standard.
I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States. Let me lay to rest the bugaboo of what is called devaluation. Your dollar will be worth just as much tomorrow as it is today.
Lies.
This means that the US dollar was no longer redeemable for an equivalent amount of gold. Your $20 bill that was redeemable for gold was probably burned in some incinerator somewhere and turned into this, where instead of it being redeemable for gold, it simply says that it's legal tender. Okay, and even more recent, our $20 bills look like this, where again, it's just a note that is legal tender. But again, you cannot redeem this for gold. What this truly means is that...
So Rami, this by any means isn't over. I just have to bone out of here at noon. So probably what we'll do is either later today or really early in the morning, I'll pick up. I'll talk with you later tonight, Rami, and we can coordinate doing some more about this, because I want to get into the BRICS video next so you can understand what's really going on and the real reason why the Federal Reserve and the bankers have declared war on Iran as well as Russia, which is the BRICS currency system. That's the real reason why we're going to war and putting at risk the lives of billions of people on the planet. Let's keep going.
The US dollar was now backed by absolutely nothing. And it has been that way ever since. Now, a currency that is backed by nothing is called fiat currency. And in Latin, the term fiat means let it be done. So because the government says that it's currency and says that it has a value, it has a value. Now, the problem with currency that is backed by nothing is that whenever the Federal Reserve creates currency and fires up their printing presses and creates currency out of thin air, it dilutes not only the US dollar, but it also dilutes all other currencies since they are backed by US dollar. And since the US dollar is backed by nothing, it means that all currencies are backed by nothing except for faith in the US government. Faith that our government is going to make good on all those treasury bonds and that we're going to make good on our currency. Now just understand this, guys, this faith only exists because most people have no clue how money is created or where it comes from
money
in the first place. Again, if you ask most people, where does money come from? They're going to say probably...
Again, it's not money. Money is something by definition that is backed by something of intrinsic value. The Federal Reserve note is worthless paper backed by the promise of corrupt politicians. Let's go.
It comes from the government. But as you're learning today, that is not true. Now, I believe that when everything is broken down into its simplest form that anybody can understand, where our currency and money comes from. So how does the Federal Reserve create and issue currency to the general public? Well, again, remember, a central bank is a private entity that manages a government's money supply and can lend money it creates from thin air to the government at interest. But how does the Federal Reserve actually do this? So we're gonna walk you through that process, and I'm gonna show you how the process works. And it's really a simple 7-step process where step 1 is where the government does deficit spending, where we spend more money than the government brings in tax revenue. And when the government does deficit spending, they need to create that money. So what they do is they reach out to the US Treasury and have the Treasury Department create what's called a Treasury bond. Okay, and these Treasury bonds, just before we go any further, these Treasury bonds are our US debt. So when you see the national debt clock and you think, gosh, our country's over $20 trillion in debt, it's because of the issuance of these Treasury bonds. But so what is a Treasury bond? Well, a bond is essentially an IOU. Okay, so it's a promise to pay. I will borrow you $1 billion and then I will pay you back in 10 years plus interest. That is an IOU, that is a bond. And the key about these bonds is that each and every one of these bonds steals from our future, right? Because it's our tax dollars that go to pay the interest and the principal.
That's right.
On these bonds when they mature, in 10 years. So every time we issue a bond, it is ensuring that our kids and even our grandkids are going to have to pay taxes to make good on all of these Treasury bonds. Also note that bond is the root word of bondage. Really, it is a state of being bound or subjected to some external power or control. So once the Treasury Department has a bond, this is where we move into step 2 with open market operations, where the Treasury Department gets to go ahead and sell, and they have a bond auction and sell our Treasury bonds. So they sell our debt to all the biggest banks in the world. From there, these big banks, through a process called open market operations, and this is where the big banks and the Fed, buy and sell the bonds. Because the big banks, they don't hold these bonds for very long. They turn around and sell these bonds directly to the Federal Reserve. And so the Federal Reserve is going to get out its big old checkbook and write a check from nothing to go ahead and purchase these bonds. So the bond goes over to the Federal Reserve. And now for the big banks, they actually get to sell these bonds to the Federal Reserve at a profit. So the big banks are here to take a cut of our national debt as profit. And as you'll see later.
And look at the big banks as baby banks that belong to the same bankers that set up the Federal Reserve System. Very simple. It's a racket. It's an absolute racket.
The banks are going to come around and they're going to get their cut of the profits every step of the way. But either way, the Federal Reserve here is going to pull out their big old checkbook and write a big old fake check from nothing to purchase these bonds. And they're going to send that IOU, right? So again, the Treasury bond itself is an IOU. The Federal Reserve is writing a check, which is essentially an IOU. But once this check goes back into the banking system, and presto, out comes currency. So it's this process of open market operations. When you hear people referring to printing money, this is the process of printing money, where again, the Treasury is going to be issuing a bond, and they're going to have a bond auction. They're going to sell it over to the big banks. The big banks are going to sell that bond to the Federal Reserve at a profit. Okay, the Federal Reserve is going to send a fake check to the big banks, and presto, currency comes into existence.
That's right.
Guys, this process is going on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And what you end up with here is a buildup of bonds at the Federal Reserve and a buildup of currency over at the Treasury. But here's a critical question. Where does the Federal Reserve's money come from to buy these bonds?
That's true,
When
Robbie.
they pull out that big old checkbook, where does the money come from to actually buy the bonds? Well, again, guys, they create it. Okay, the money comes from nothing. And if you don't believe me, hear from the Federal Reserve themselves. Quote, "When you or I write a check, there must be sufficient funds in our account to cover the check. But when the Federal Reserve writes a check, there is no bank deposit on which that check is drawn. When the Federal Reserve writes a check, it is creating money." You can even hear it directly from Ben Bernanke, former chair of the Federal Reserve.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Bernanke, I'm looking at the report that you handed out this morning. There's a table on page 26 which consists of your balance sheet. And one of the entries on the balance sheet is under assets, central bank liquidity swaps, which shows an increase from the end of 2007 from $24 billion to $553 billion in change at the end of 2008. What's that?
Those are swaps that were done with foreign central banks. We're not lending to those banks, we're lending to the central bank. The central bank is responsible for repaying us.
So who got the money?
To financial institutions in Europe and other countries.
Which ones?
I don't know.
Well, let's start with which central banks got the money.
There are 14 of them which are listed in our, I'm sure they're listed in here somewhere.
Who made that decision?
The Federal Open Market Committee.
And under what legal authority?
We have a long-standing legal authority to do swaps with other central banks. My counsel says Section 14 of the Federal Reserve Act.
All right, well, the Constitution says no money shall be drawn from the Treasury but in consequence of appropriations made by law.
This money is not drawn from the Treasury.
Well, let's talk about that. Do you think it's consistent with the spirit of that provision of the Constitution for a group like the FMOC to hand out $500 billion to foreigners without any action by this Congress?
Congress approved it in the Federal Reserve Act. But the Federal Reserve Act was in 1913.
Is it safe to say that nobody in 1913 contemplated that your small...
Is it safe to say that Congress had the authority to overrule the Constitution? I don't think so. And there is long-standing argument and legal authority that even the 16th Amendment was not passed by all the states. And even if it was, it still didn't pass constitutional muster for individuals, only for corporations. So there's a real problem here. And I'm not going to keep doing this because I have just a short amount of time. I want to explain to you, this is the reason why we're going to war, guys. There are pretextual reasons, like Iran has nukes, but Russia, China, India, and several other what they call BRICS nations are the reason why this is happening. The Federal Reserve does not want to lose its ability to create money out of nothing and make banksters rich. So let's look now at what the BRICS currency system is. Well, let's look at what some people who are part of the BRICS, proponents of the BRICS currency system, and this is a channel called Think BRICS. And I believe these are Italians. I'm not quite sure, but they have Italian accents. But let's get into it and try to finish at least this video before I have to take off. Let's go.
Present you once again the friend of ours, Lorenzo Pacini. The followers of our channel know very well that we have already made some interviews with Lorenzo, and this one should have been taking place in Tehran, in Iran. But unfortunately, due to events happened and continue happening this week, we could not do that, and we are here in Italy. So it's unexpected turn. And we are in the city town of Viterbo, walking on the street. Well, and we just would like to talk to Lorenzo about the situation happening in these days in our world. For those who is not aware of Lorenzo, he works and contributes a lot to strategic culture. That the website, please visit. Same as our friend Pepe Escobar. And the recent article Pepe Escobar wrote on strategic culture is dedicated to Iran. Actually, we made a video of ours on Think BRICS YouTube channel dedicated to that very tragic events happening in Iran. And today we would like to dive deeper into this discussion with Lorenzo. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you again. That's a great pleasure.
Actually, my first question is, did you read already an article written by Pepe Escobar?
Yeah, I did.
What can you tell? Do you agree with his point?
For sure. What is happening now is very useful for with attacking BRICS. not only as a geo-economic partenariat, but mostly as a kind of soft power for the international set, that we are approaching to this multipolar chessboard. And attacking Iran now, especially before the BRICS summit in Rio de Janeiro, means to exercise a new kind of soft power against the multipolar new poles in the world. Because they know that attacking Iran, they are not only pressing in the same Iran itself, but we are moving Russia, we are moving China. They are still not moving directly, but as a consequence, India, and all the other countries of the Islamic world. And I would like to focus this, because the Islamic world has been one of the most important points in the previous meeting of Kazan. During the forum, many discussed about the huge presence of Islamic countries inside of BRICS. That was parallel to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which the forum will be in October, if I remember well, of this year. And this means that they will try to press a lot with this kind of soft power down all the Islamic countries to don't coalesce together.
Right.
And in this way, they want to break this possible new front of pressure. And doing that, this weakness will not be only on Iran and Islamic countries, but also in the connection that they have with Russia and China, and in the pressure that they can both exercise in South America. Because this is very important. A new project in South America started like the new commercial port from Shanghai to Shanghai, okay? Started just after they managed new commercial agreements with the old roads passing through Arabia and the Islamic countries. Also in Southeast Asia, which mostly Indonesia and Malaysia are Islamic Sunni. This means that they found a deal, and following this deal, they were planning the next step. So if they try to break the Islamic front, they will give a very serious punch to the BRICS partenariat. But instead of that, what we see now is that the world is coalescing, helping Iran, and the international opinion is mostly agreeing that Israel did something wrong. They are condemning Israel, and they are trying to let Iran arise with a new position in the global opinion. It's not so easy, because for many years they have spoken about Iran as a terroristic state with a kind of a very bad reputation because of the regime, because of the Ayatollahs. And this is something that they are trying to reshape. But with this cohesion that we are seeing now, maybe the Islamic front can finally found a new possible agreement to cooperate together. And with Pepe, I was discussing this some days ago, and it's so interesting that there are the standards to realize this. We have to see if there is also the political intention to do that, because maybe it's too early to create a kind of multipolar alliance of the Islamic states, because as you know, the different opinions in Islam, they are still dividing a lot, and we have two big problems for the Islamic world: Emirates and Saudi Arabia. Especially Saudi Arabia, which is actually has been created by United States, UK, and Israel, financially just to become this petrol power with the dollar. So
and I learned the other day that it appears as though the Saudi royal family actually has Hebrew lineage, which is really interesting. In fact, they're probably more Aramaic and Hebrew than the Ashkenaz and the Europeans that are currently in control of the state of Israel, based upon some information that I learned just yesterday. So that was kind of shocking to me. But anyways, these are some Italians that are pushing for a BRICS currency system. And now what I'm going to do is the next video we're going to talk about is what if BRICS nations, and again, these are countries that are trying to change the world currency system off of the fiat currency system created at Jekyll Island by some very wealthy bankers like the Rothschilds and the Warburgs, who actually control major banking interest in Israel and Europe and have done so for hundreds of years, maybe even thousands. And these China, Russia, and Iran, the major leaders in the BRICS currency system, are trying to change that. And I just don't have enough time to really go into all the history, guys, but let's just learn a little bit about what would happen if these BRICS nations were able to form a worldwide alliance. And obviously, we can't get good news from the propaganda from CNN, Communist News Network, and PMSNBC, so I have to go to Al Jazeera and European news sources to try to piece together a show for you. Unfortunately, it's very, very difficult to get real news. All we get here in the US is propaganda. Give me a bunch of ones if you agree. Let's get into this one.
In late October 2024, a collection of leaders and dignitaries hailing from 36 world nations descended upon the city of Kazan in Russia, boasting some truly stunning architecture, over 1 million residents, and the status of the capital of the Russian Republic of Tatarstan. Kazan is a vibrant city that makes a habit of welcoming tourists from all across the globe, but on this occasion, the city's visitors had come strictly on business, made up of delegations from places as far-flung as China, Brazil, South Africa, Turkey, Malaysia, and dozens more. Kazan's foreign visitors weren't there to celebrate Russian President Vladimir Putin, nor to engage in geopolitical pageantry, nor to even plead with Putin to stop the war in Ukraine. Instead, the nations of the world had gathered in Kazan to be part of a little something called BRICS. First founded over 15 years ago by the nations of Russia, Brazil, China, and India, BRICS is an intergovernmental organization that's gone from geopolitical curiosity to rising global powerhouse. Today it comprises 9 powerful nations. It does business in 8 official languages, it comprises 30% of the world's land surface, and holds 45% of the global population. The organization's waitlist includes dozens of nations spread out across 4 continents. BRICS runs a global financial institution that rivals the International Monetary Fund. It intends to one day rival the Western world on every conceivable metric of economics, and it hopes to become an enduring counterweight to global institutions like...
Now, really quickly, we know now, based on intelligence reports, that China apparently, allegedly, has been flying in hypersonic missiles to Iran. And I don't know if you noticed, but our Golden Dome, or whatever they want to call it, it's not stopping these missiles. These hypersonic missiles are going into the atmosphere and basically systematically destroying Israel. So right now, if the United States, the CIA, and Israel don't act, not only will our reserve currency status be destroyed, but so will Israel and possibly the United States. Again, remember, Sleepy Joe opened our southern border. We don't know how many sleeper cells simply walked across and brought weapons of mass destruction. We have no idea, but we've definitely kicked a hornet's nest. So I would look for the fear and greed index tomorrow when the stock market opens to be high. And I hope that you establish out positions on your, like, stop losses on your stocks, because I would be looking for a major stock market crash tomorrow. I think the only thing of value would be to gamble on SVIX and UVIX right now. I'm not giving you financial advice, but I have a ton of UVIX, and I'm thinking it's probably going to go up to 60 to 100 tomorrow. And I'm going to be gambling on whether or not I want to hold it or sell it. And I'm going to be looking at buying some additional options on UVIX and possibly SVIX. So that's what I'm looking at to try to save me from some of this stuff. And then I'm going to roll all that stuff over into Bitcoin, gold, and digital currency. But let's keep listening.
Like the G7, the World Bank, and other globalist bastions that are dominated by the influence of the global West. But with BRICS growing in power and pulling in a wider and wider array of nations that the US, the European Union, and other Western power players consider to be hostile, global experts, analysts, and pundits have started to center in on a critical
Yeah, I
question.
did, Kevin.
What if the BRICS organization became a military alliance? Well, today we're going to dive into the prospect of a militarized BRICS, the motivations that would cause BRICS nations to consider such a thing, the impressive military power that such an alliance could command, and the likelihood that the nations of the BRICS organization might one day take the leap.
You don't need to be famous to have your name, address, and personal info plastered all across the internet. It just...
All right, so let's get back into... I don't want to get in trouble for advertising on my channel. I really like this guy's channel, by the way.
Incogni. Use the code WARFRONTS at Incogni.
It's called Warfronts, and I hope that he's okay with me doing a reaction video. Again, this is purely based on fair use, guys. I'm using this for educational, non-commercial purposes. It's a donations-driven channel. I'm not expecting to make any money off of this. I make my money as a lawyer. Strike that. I make my Federal Reserve currency as a lawyer. I do catastrophic injury cases, and I primarily only handle motorcycle accidents and truck accidents. So there's really no financial interest in me doing this other than because I'm a military historian and an inactive U.S. Marine, and I do not want to see any of my Marine brothers going into another Federal Reserve war. Don't want it. Give me a bunch of ones if you thought that Donald Trump was going to be the anti-war president, and you're very disappointed. I know I sure am.
Incogni.com/warfronts to get 60% off.
Worked for Goldman Sachs, and who had predicted at that time that the four rapidly advancing nations he had picked out were destined to grow and rival the US and Europe. The four BRIC nations, perhaps unsurprisingly, seemed to like the idea, and after nearly a decade of meetings, more meetings, and meetings about meetings, and meetings to schedule opportunities to have more meetings, they finally sealed the deal in Yekaterinburg in Russia in 2009. The goal at the start was for the four founding BRIC nations to band together, leveraging their shared economic power and address fundamental issues that had made problems for them for a very long time. These included the world's Western-controlled, inefficient, and arguably broken financial institutions. It included the way that developing nations tended to be ostracized and kept out of geopolitical decision-making, and it included the four nations' collective vulnerability to economic shocks like the then ongoing Great Recession. Catastrophes like the recession, or problematic institutions like the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, had a way of becoming the BRIC nations' problem, despite the BRIC nations never really getting a say in how they were managed. A year and a half after BRIC first came together, South Africa was incorporated into the group courtesy of an invite from China, and with the organization's name changed to the somewhat catchier title of BRICS, they got to work changing the world. Since then, the BRICS nations have worked hard to create an alternative global financial institution to rival the IMF and the World Bank. Known as the New Development Bank, the BRICS institution today does business with a range of world nations, including not just 5, but 10 core members. Headed by former Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff, the bank leverages the equivalent of hundreds of billions of US dollars and now works together with the World Bank while supporting a range of global development initiatives. BRICS contributions to global infrastructure development totaled over $32 billion by the end of 2022. BRICS has worked for years on a plan to build an alternative network of optical fiber submarine cables allowing secure communications between BRICS nations without being subject to the powers of America's national security agency.
And that's what it is right there. So in a nutshell, guys, I'm not going to play this whole video. I just wanted, because I thought it was very educational, I wanted you to understand what BRICS nations are and what their currency is. And basically what it is it's a system that's actually backed by something of value other than a promise. And so that is what this war is about. And let's be honest, guys, Iran knew that they were going to be attacked. Any nuclear material that they had, that they needed, that's been gone for a while. They knew that our bunker busters might have the capability of getting at that stuff. And so it was trucked out and it was moved away. And I just sent up a poll for you guys. What do you think? Yes or no? Do you think that Trump's going to have to send in U.S. ground troops under the pretext that we have to get that nuclear material? And yeah, I agree. I think that Iran does have nukes. And I think that Iran is an evil country. I think anyone who says death to America is an enemy of mine, me personally, and that we need to take action. What I'm getting, and I'm a patriot, I love my country, but let's look at the real reason for the war. That's what we're here to do today. This is a war by the CIA and the Mossad against the BRICS nations. Make no mistake about it, that's why we're in Ukraine. That's why we've attacked Russia. We promised Russia that we would never allow Ukraine to become part of NATO. And then we started backpedaling. And that's why Russia sent troops into Ukraine, to prevent Ukraine from becoming part of NATO. Russia didn't want to be surrounded by NATO. And so that's why they attacked. That's the only reason they attacked, because the Europeans and the United States went against their promise in Russia's eyes and started sending troops into Ukraine and started making treatises to let them into NATO. Don't listen to CNN and PMSNBC. These are propaganda agencies for, in my opinion, the Federal Reserve private monetary system, which is actually a fiat currency-based system. Give me a bunch of ones if you agree. So let's get into the next video. This is Colonel McGregor. I really like Colonel McGregor. He's a legit dude. And I think that he's right on the money. And of course, anybody that CNN and MSNBC doesn't like is probably somebody we should listen to. So let's listen to what Colonel Doug McGregor says in this video. And let's get it queued up, because I only have about another 20 minutes before I got to split out of here, guys. Let's go. Let's skip it ahead a little.
World War III. Are the nuclear facilities destroyed? Who is going to strike whom next? It's the mother of all talk shows. Stay tuned.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
By way of deception, make war. That's exactly what's been going on, not for the last 2 weeks, not for the last 2 months, but very much longer than that. It was always the plan that the United States empire, under whichever president, would try to destroy the Islamic Republic of Iran. They tried every which way. They tried sanctions, murderous sanctions, beyond all precedent. But that did not work. They tried terrorism. They tried assassinating nuclear scientists. They tried the sneak attack 2 weeks ago, and they've been lying ever since. Deception was the order of the day, or as Secretary Hegseth said, misdirection. Misdirection is deception. Deception is what Mike Pompeo, the former head of the CIA, told you from his own mouth that he had been doing as the head of the CIA. We lied and we lied and we lied, he said. Any fool who sits down with any emissary of the United States of America now and expects that they are not being deceived, not being lied to, is, well, frankly, an idiot. And that goes for the Russian government in Ukraine. It definitely goes for the Chinese government over any bilateral conflicts between the USA and China. It went for the Iranians, and it goes for the Palestinians.
And by the way, Jimmy, I used to live in Motherwell, Scotland, and I really love listening to a Scotsman talk the truth, Jimmy. Sounds great, doesn't he, mate?
Palestinians in Gaza too. They are one. As Trump told you, actually rather eloquently, when he thanked Netanyahu before thanking the American service personnel involved in last night's operation, as it happens. He thanked Netanyahu. He described them as a team like has never been seen before. He said, with his typical hyperbole, everything's lovelier, biglier, and ever more beautiful, according to Donald Trump.
All right,
he
Jimmy
was not lying when he said that he and Netanyahu were a team. And this leads me to a point that I have to make, though there are many, who disagree with me.
Aye.
The
great.
truth is that Israel and America are one. They are one country. The truth was given to you by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. when he described Israel in his presidential run as being an aircraft carrier for the United States in the Mediterranean. That is precisely why Israel was founded, virtue of the Balfour Declaration in 1917, which one of Balfour's cabinet described as being a loyal little British Ulster in the heart of the Arab world. It's no longer a British Ulster, but it is definitely an American one. Its purpose there is to be an aircraft carrier. Its purpose there is to sow division in the East and to help state capture the politics of Western countries. But they are not separate things. They are not separate entities. And the tail doesn't wag the dog. This simple matter of canine biology is beyond a lot of people. I've spent the day arguing about it on Twitter. Tails can't wag dogs. Dogs wag tails.
That's right.
The truth is that the Israelis are a very useful aircraft carrier indeed. Well worth the 3 to 5.
So guys, I just got word from my wife that I've got to run some errands for the fam. I'm a dedicated father. I homeschool my kids. I'm training my son to be an Olympic judo champion, and I run my own firm. And so I have responsibilities, but I did do a live for you this morning on the way to the gym. And when I get back from running errands, I intend on finishing this show. So are you... you just let the cat out of the bag. That's right, Mr. Osgood. Are you guys cool with me coming back maybe in a couple hours and wrapping up the show? I'll do like a part 2, and we'll get into what Colonel Douglas McGregor has to say. Jimmy, what do you think, man? But I'm definitely worried about our country. I'm worried about the United States having to send boots on the ground. Let me take a look really quickly at the poll. Right now, it looks like we've got a 53% yes that Trump is going to send in boots on the ground. A lot of you guys, 46% say that he's not going to put boots on the ground. Honestly, guys, I'm pretty sure that Iran already pulled out their nuclear bombs from those mountains that we bombed prior to the attack, that Iran still has nukes. I personally do not like the Iranian government. I'm hoping that the Iranian people will revolt against their government. But now with Israel dropping bombs on them, and now the United States, they have just that much more reason to say death to America. So I'm very, very concerned. Sleepy Joe opened our southern borders for the last 4 years. We have no idea how many jihadis and people hostile to our nation brought in nuclear and other types of mass destruction weapons into our country. And so in closing, at least for this session, what I want to share with you is my tips that I'm personally sharing with my family and I'm actively engaging in. Number 1, get to the Army Navy surplus store, grab camping equipment, grab MREs if you can find them, meals ready to eat, non-perishable goods as much as you can. Get a gas generator and get some gas. If the power grid goes down, within 3 days, you're going to have inner city illegal aliens and everyone else who doesn't have access to this stuff coming into your area. Don't shelter in place. Get a tent, get camping equipment, and try to get out of the city. Make sure that you have at least one AR-15 and maybe one pistol. Have at least 1,000 rounds of ammunition, minimum. Form alliances with military veterans within your community who are like me. Form parallel systems with people who think like you. Make sure that you have block captains organized and you have people that you can trust so you can form your own encampments, assuming things go south. I'm not saying it's going to. I'm not an alarmist, but I'm a survivalist, and I understand what's going on. This is a war with the Federal Reserve System against the BRICS nations. And because we've kicked the hornet's nest with Iran, China and Russia are going to use Iran as their proxy to launch attacks within the United States if they haven't already done so. So you should be very, very concerned about that. So I definitely want to. No, you're not done, Mr. DRLU, but don't think you're going to be able to use the freeways or highways, right? We already know that illegal aliens are shutting down highways, waving Mexican flags, basically saying the same thing, death to America. And they were invited here, by the way, by Sleepy Joe to come into Sanctuary City. So the best thing that I could recommend is make sure you have a bicycle or one of those really cool motorcycles with the big fat tires that you can load equipment on, so you'll be able to bypass freeways and take back roads out. Know that highwaymen and people who want your money and gangs are going to be coming after you for your food and for your weaponry. So if you don't have a parallel system set up in place with like-minded people, you're going to be at a disadvantage. So again, make sure you've got tents, camping equipment, gas generators, and that you've got non-perishable foods, and you have a place to bug out to where you can set up a perimeter and have some kind of safety. And you need a lot of water, guys. And one of the things that I would recommend is to buy a water purification system. They sell pump water purification systems. And if you don't have one, try to form an alliance with someone who does. Make sure you have gold and silver, because you're not, the only thing you're going to be able to trade is gold, silver, and bullets, pretty much. So with that being said, make sure you double tap that screen, make sure you like and subscribe, and make sure to save, because we never know when the thought police are going to take down this channel. I'm going to do my very best to come back and do a part 2 for you so we can finish hearing what Colonel McGregor has to say, and I'll also get that video queued up that Rami sent me. But with that being said, guys, I do have to run some errands. Got to look after the fam. My duty comes first to my wife and kids, as you guys know. So make sure to like and subscribe. Make sure to save, because we never know when the thought police are going to take down this channel. Semper Fi, do or die. Talk to you guys soon.